She cheated on me with my best friend, then came back crying when my life took off. I'm 26 now, and when I look back at how my life was just a couple of years ago, it honestly feels like I'm remembering someone else's memories instead of my own. Because back then, everything felt simple in a way I didn't even realize was fragile. I had a girlfriend I thought I was going to marry and a best friend I'd known for almost a decade. The kind of people you don't question because questioning them never even crosses your mind. She and I met in college, bonded over late night coffee runs and shared stress over exams, grew together through internships and first jobs. The kind of relationship where you don't post constantly about each other because you don't feel the need to prove anything. And my best friend, let's call him Jake, was there before her, during her, and I assumed would be there long after. We'd grown up together, survived bad haircuts, bad grades, worse decisions, and inside jokes no one else would ever understand. He was the guy I trusted with my passwords, my spare keys, and my worst thoughts. So when people talk about betrayal like it's something you can see coming, always think they've never actually lived through it. Because when it happened to me, it didn't start with anything dramatic. It started with small shifts I explained away because that's what you do when you love someone and trust the people around you. My girlfriend, I'll call her Emily, started changing in ways that didn't seem alarming on the surface. She became quieter, more distracted. Her laugh felt forced sometimes, and when I asked if something was wrong, she'd say she was just tired or stressed or figuring things out. And I believed her because why wouldn't I? We'd built years together. I wasn't the jealous type. I never checked her phone or questioned where she went, and I definitely didn't suspect the guy who sat on my couch every weekend pretending to care about my problems. But then the comments started slipping in, subtle at first, almost harmless. She'd mention how one of her coworkers had just bought a new car or how someone she knew was already making six figures or traveling constantly. And I'd laugh it off and say we'd get there in our own time. But then one night she said something that stuck with me. We were sitting on the couch, the TV on, but neither of us watching. And she said, I don't know. Sometimes it feels like everything with you is just comfortable. And I smiled because I thought she meant it in a good way. Like safe, stable, real, but she didn't smile back. She followed it with, I just don't feel excited anymore. And that word, excited, hung in the air longer than it should have. I asked what she meant, what she wanted, what I could do differently. And she shrugged and said she didn't know, which hurt more than if she'd given me a list, because how do you fix something someone can't explain? And around that same time, Jake started inserting himself more into my relationship, calling more often, coming over uninvited, asking questions that sounded like concern but felt oddly invasive, like, do you think Emily's really happy? Or, man, relationships are hard. Sometimes people just grow apart. And I thought he was being supportive. I thought he was being honest in a way only a best friend can be. So when he suggested I give her more space, stop trying so hard, let things breathe, I listened because loyalty matters to me. I was raised believing that if you stand by people long enough, things work out. I didn't believe in chasing constant excitement. I believed in showing up, in consistency, in choosing someone every day even when it wasn't thrilling. So I ignored the red flags. I ignored how Emily started dressing differently when she went out without me. Ignored how she'd angle her phone away when she texted. Ignored how Jake suddenly knew things about her moods before I did, because my brain never once connected those dots. And then came the moment that still replays in my head in brutal clarity. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was so ordinary. I was using Emily's laptop one afternoon because mine had died and I needed to check an email. She'd given me her password years ago and never changed it, which I took as proof of trust, and when I opened the browser, a social media message tab was already open. Not because I was snooping, not because I was looking for anything, it was just there, and at first I wasn't even alarmed until I saw Jake's name at the top. My stomach didn't drop yet. I just felt confused because why would they be messaging each other privately so often? And then I saw the timestamps. Messages sent late at night, early mornings, long threads that went back months, and I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they were planning something for me. Maybe he was helping her with something. So I scrolled, still calm, still trusting, until I saw a line that didn't fit any innocent scenario. I wish we didn't have to hide this. And everything inside me went cold. My hands actually started shaking, not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. And I kept reading even though part of me was screaming to stop, because once you see the truth starting to form, you need to know how bad it really is. There were jokes, compliments, emotional confessions, and then messages that crossed a line so clearly there was no misunderstanding. No gray area, no, it didn't mean anything. This wasn't a mistake, this wasn't a one-time lapse, this was a relationship happening behind my back, built slowly, deliberately, while I was sitting right there trusting both of them. And the worst part wasn't even the sexual stuff, it was the emotional intimacy. The way they talked about me like I was an obstacle instead of a person. Like, something in the way of what they wanted. And when Emily came home later that day, I didn't yell, I didn't throw anything, I just asked her to sit down. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, too calm for what was happening, and I asked her if there was anything she needed to tell me. She looked confused at first, then cautious and said no, and that single lie, said so easily, hurt more than all the messages combined, because it told me she would have kept going if I hadn't found out. So I turned the laptop toward her and watched her face change in real time. The color draining, the silence stretching, and then came the excuses, the justifications, the way she framed it like something that happened to her instead of something she chose. She said she felt neglected. She said she didn't mean for it to go that far. She said it just happened. And when I asked how long, she hesitated and before admitting it had been months. Months of lying, months of smiling at me while sleeping with my best friend. And when I confronted Jake later that night, he didn't even deny it. He looked almost relieved, like he was tired of pretending, and that realization shattered something in me, because it meant every piece of advice he'd given me, every concerned look, every time he told me to give her space, it was all calculated, all serving his own interests. And when I asked him how he could do this to me, after everything, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "I didn't plan to fall for her, but you weren't making her happy." As if that justified betrayal, as if my imperfections gave him permission to destroy me. And standing there, listening to the two people I trusted most explain why I deserved what they did, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. Not angry, not dramatic, just painfully aware that to them I was replaceable, a background character in my own story. And that night, after they both left, after the apartment went quiet, I sat alone and realized something that would change everything that came after. Love didn't protect me. Loyalty didn't save me, and the people I gave my whole heart to valued excitement more than integrity. And I understood in that moment that whatever I thought I meant to them, it was far less than I believed, and nothing would ever be the same again. I didn't wake up the next morning feeling angry or motivated or ready to rebuild myself the way movies make it look. I woke up feeling hollow, like someone had scooped everything out of my chest and left the body behind to go through the motions. And that hollow feeling followed me everywhere in the weeks that came after, because the betrayal didn't just end my relationship, it quietly dismantled my entire life piece by piece, starting with the people I thought were our friends, the group we hung out with on weekends, celebrated birthdays with, planned trips with, and at first everyone acted shocked and sympathetic. Messages flooded in saying things like, "I'm so sorry, man," and "You didn't deserve that." But sympathy is fragile when it requires effort. And slowly I noticed how conversations changed, how replies took longer, how invites stopped coming, because Emily and Jake were still together, still showing up places, still smiling, and people don't like discomfort. They don't like choosing sides when it inconveniences them. So some of them chose quietly by simply drifting away from me. Others chose more openly, repeating half-truths and softened versions of the story where blame got evenly distributed instead of placed where it belonged. And then there were the rumors, the ones I never heard directly but felt in the way people looked at me, the way someone would hesitate before asking how I was doing, the whispers that said I must have done something wrong, that I must have been emotionally unavailable or boring or too focused on work, because in people's minds, cheating needs a reason that makes it easier to digest, and it was easier for them to believe I wasn't good enough than to accept that someone they liked was capable of hurting me that badly without remorse. And that narrative seeped into my own head more than I want to admit, because when you're alone with your thoughts long enough, they start sounding like facts. Nights became the worst, sleep stopped coming naturally. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from years ago, analyzing conversations, rereading old texts, wondering which memories were real and which ones were just illusions I built because I wanted to believe in something solid. I'd wake up exhausted, go to work on autopilot, stare at my screen without absorbing anything, reread the same email 10 times, forget what I was doing halfway through tasks, and my performance started slipping. Not in dramatic ways, just enough that I noticed, just enough that it scared me. Because work had always been the one place I felt competent, the one thing that still felt like mine. And even that was starting to crumble. Meanwhile, Emily and Jake didn't disappear or lie low the way I secretly hoped they might. They went public, posting pictures together, tagging each other, smiling in ways that felt intentional, calculated, like they wanted the world to see how happy they were, how right the choice was, and I told myself not to look. I muted them, blocked them, unblocked them, blocked them again, because curiosity mixed with pain is a powerful thing. And every time I slipped and saw something new, it felt like reopening a wound that hadn't even started to heal. What hurt more than the photos was the tone, the captions about choosing happiness and growth, and when you finally stopped settling, because those words weren't neutral, they were knives, and even when my name wasn't mentioned, I knew exactly who the subtext was aimed at. I felt humiliated in a way that was hard to explain, like my private heartbreak had become public entertainment. And there were days I'd get home from work, close the door, slide down against it, and just sit there on the floor, fully dressed, staring at nothing, tears coming without warning, not loud sobs, just silent crying that left my chest aching. I stopped reaching out to people because I didn't want to feel like a burden. And I stopped responding to messages because I didn't know how to answer "How are you?" without lying or oversharing. Weekends stretched endlessly, empty and quiet, and for the first time since I was a teenager, I caught myself thinking about quitting my job. Not because I had a plan, but because I wanted escape. A reset, something drastic enough to interrupt the pain, and that scared me because I'd always been steady, reliable, the guy who didn't fall apart. Yet here I was, questioning everything about myself, my worth, my masculinity, my future, wondering if I really was as replaceable as they made me feel, wondering if being loyal and patient and consistent was just another way of being forgettable. There was no dramatic turning point where things suddenly got better, no inspirational speech, no friend showing up at the perfect moment. Instead, something quieter happened, almost unnoticeable at first. I started staying late at work, not to impress anyone, not to chase validation, but because the office was quiet after hours, because it gave me an excuse not to go home to the silence, and in that quiet I could focus, I could lose myself in tasks without thinking about what I'd lost. I stopped explaining myself to people, stopped defending my side of the story, stopped correcting rumors, because every explanation felt like reopening the wound and handing someone else control over it. I began pulling away from anyone who made me feel small, anyone who asked questions just to satisfy their curiosity, anyone who treated my pain like gossip, and I didn't announce it or confront it anyone. I just went silent, replies got shorter, hangouts got declined, names got removed from my life one by one. And even though I was still hurting, even though I still cried some nights and doubted myself more than I'd ever admit out loud, there was a strange clarity settling in beneath the pain, a realization that no apology was coming, not from Emily, not from Jake, not from the friends who vanished. And that realization was devastating, but also grounding, because once you accept that no one is rushing in to save you, you're forced to face the truth that the only way forward is through your own effort, your own choices, your own resilience. And by the end of that chapter of my life, stripped of the relationship, the friend group, the identity I'd built around being someone's partner and someone's best friend, I understood something painful and important at the same time. I had lost almost everything that defined me, and the world hadn't stopped. No justice had arrived, no karma had corrected the balance, and if I wanted my life to mean something again, it was going to have to be because I rebuilt it myself, not because anyone felt sorry enough to make things right. People like to imagine growth as something loud and cinematic, like you wake up one day, motivated, hit the gym, land a dream job, and suddenly your life has a soundtrack. But that wasn't how it happened for me at all. It was quieter, slower, and honestly lonelier than the collapse that came before it. Because after you accept that no one is coming to save you, you're left with long stretches of time where the only witness to your effort is you. And at first, that felt pointless, but it also became freeing because I stopped performing my pain for anyone, stopped posting vague quotes, stopped waiting for someone to notice how much I was hurting, and instead, I started doing the unglamorous work of rebuilding myself piece by piece, starting with my career, which had been stagnant even before everything fell apart. I'd been in a safe, predictable role that paid the bills but didn't excite me. And after the breakup, it became painfully clear that safety without fulfillment was just another kind of numbness. So I made a decision that scared me more than saying miserable. I pivoted into a new field, something adjacent to tech and business, a startup environment where nothing was guaranteed and failure was a real possibility. And people around me thought it was reckless. Some even said it out loud, especially the same voices that had quietly sided against me during the fallout. But I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I just did it. I took online courses at night, watched tutorials until my eyes burned, learned skills that didn't give immediate rewards, rewired my routine so that instead of doom scrolling or numbing myself with distractions, I was building competence. And it wasn't inspirational, it was exhausting. My weekends disappeared, my social life shrank even more. And there were nights I questioned whether I was just running from pain instead of healing it. But the difference was that every small win, every new thing I learned, every problem I solved on my own gave me something Emily and Jake never could take away from me. Progress that didn't require validation. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Things began to shift. My confidence stopped being something I pretended to have and became something rooted in evidence. My coworkers started trusting me with bigger responsibilities. My name began coming up in rooms I wasn't in, and when I finally got an offer that represented a real step forward, not just financially but professionally, I accepted it quietly, without posting about it, without telling people who didn't need to know, because I learned the hard way that not everyone deserves access to your milestones. Around that same time, I moved out of my old place, the apartment that still echoed with memories I didn't want to carry forward, and somewhere that felt like a reset rather than a reminder. I bought better clothes. Not flashy ones, just ones that fit properly, ones that made me feel put together without trying to prove anything. I fixed my posture, my sleep schedule, my diet, not out of self-love at first, but out of discipline, and discipline eventually turned into respect for myself. And what surprised me most wasn't the external changes, it was how people started responding to me differently. Coworkers listened more closely when I spoke, strangers treated me with a baseline respect I hadn't noticed was missing before, and even friends who had drifted away began reaching out again. Casually at first, like nothing had happened, testing whether they could reinsert themselves into my life now that I seemed stable again, and I didn't confront them or call them out. I just chose who had access and who didn't, because growth teaches you that boundaries are quieter than anger, but far more powerful. Somewhere in the background of all this, Emily and Jake were still together, at least publicly. Though I only knew that through secondhand information I never asked for, mutual acquaintances would mention things in passing, like how they'd moved in together too quickly, or how money was tight, or how they argued more than they used to. And I didn't take pleasure in it the way I once imagined I might. It just registered as noise until I noticed something else, something subtle but telling. They were watching me. Not directly, not openly, but in the way people who regret their choices always do. My LinkedIn profile got repeat views from familiar names. My Instagram stories, which I rarely posted, would be watched almost immediately by accounts I didn't follow anymore. And it was strange, realizing that while I'd been rebuilding in silence, they'd been looking back, comparing, measuring, wondering. But I still didn't flex, didn't engage, didn't give them a narrative to latch onto, because the best part of moving on quietly is that it denies people the satisfaction of knowing exactly where they stand with you. The moment that crystallized everything came on a random weekday evening, months after I thought I was done thinking about them. I was grabbing coffee near my new place after work, dressed in clothes that felt like me rather than a costume, relaxed in a way I hadn't been in years, when I saw them, Emily and Jake, standing in line a few feet away, arguing under their breath about something trivial, probably money or timing or stress, and my heart didn't race the way I expected it to. It just slowed, because for the first time I wasn't seeing them through the lens of loss, I was seeing them as they were. Two people stuck in the aftermath of their own decisions. And when Emily turned and our eyes met, there was a flicker of recognition followed by confusion. Not because she didn't know who I was, but because I didn't fit the version of me she'd left behind. I wasn't slumped or broken or angry. I was calm, composed, unfamiliar, and I realized in that moment that they didn't recognize me anymore. Not really, because the person they betrayed no longer existed. He'd been replaced quietly, without announcements or revenge, by someone who'd built a life that didn't revolve around proving anything to them. And as I walked past them, without stopping, without speaking, without giving them the reaction they might have expected, I understood something that felt like a turning point, even though nothing dramatic happened. While they were busy justifying their choices and watching to see if I'd fail, I had been building, and the distance between who I was and who I'd become was something they could see but never cross. Because growth like that doesn't come from stealing someone else's happiness, it comes from sitting alone with your pain long enough to turn it into something solid. The message came on a night that felt no different from any other, which is probably why it caught me off guard. I was sitting on my couch after a long day, laptop closed, phone face down, enjoying the quiet I'd fought so hard to earn, when I finally picked it up and saw her name on my screen for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. And my first reaction wasn't panic or excitement or even anger. It was a strange neutrality, like seeing a word you used to know the meaning of, but no longer feel attached to. She didn't start with confidence or nostalgia or small talk. She started with an apology so long it felt rehearsed. Paragraphs about how she'd been thinking for months, how she'd grown, how she finally understood how much she hurt me. And I noticed immediately what wasn't there. No defensiveness, no justification, disguised as honesty, just exhaustion. And that alone told me something had changed, because Emily had always been proud, always certain of her choices, but this message felt written by someone who had run out of certainty. She admitted she'd been immature, said she confused excitement with connection, said she thought she wanted something different until she got it, and realized too late what it cost her. Realized something essential about myself. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want her to suffer or beg or regret me forever. I didn't want the satisfaction of turning her down dramatically or listing every way she'd hurt me, because those things would have tied me to the version of myself that needed validation from her. And I wasn't that person anymore. So I told her the truth, calmly, gently, without cruelty. I told her I understood why she'd made the choices she did, even if I didn't agree with them, that I believed she was sorry, that I didn't hate her, and that forgiveness, for me, didn't mean reopening a door that had already closed. It meant not carrying resentment forward. I told her that the life I'd built wasn't something I could share with someone who had once walked away from me so easily, not because I was better than her, but because I finally respected myself enough to choose consistency over nostalgia. And as I stood to leave, I saw the realization hit her fully. Not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet and devastating. The understanding that she hadn't just lost a relationship, she'd lost access to a version of me that no longer existed. That the man she could have grown with was now someone she could only look at from the outside. And I walked away without looking back, not out of strength, but out of peace. Because in that moment, it became clear that success wasn't the job title or the apartment or the way people treated me now. It was the fact that I no longer needed to be chosen by someone who once made me feel replaceable. I chose myself, and that choice changed everything. The end. All right, let me say this to you straight. The way I'd say it to my audience if I were sitting back in my chair with the mic on and no script in front of me. What hit me about this story wasn't the cheating itself, because let's be honest, betrayal stories are everywhere. What made this one different is that it didn't turn into a revenge fantasy or a highlight reel of flexing. It felt painfully real. This was a story about a man losing not just a relationship, but his sense of identity, his place in his own life, and watching the world quietly move on without him. And that's something a lot of people don't talk about enough, especially men. The main character doesn't come out swinging or trying to prove he's better. He collapses first, he doubts himself, he feels replaceable. And that honesty makes everything that follows believable instead of performative. What I respect most is how the growth happens in silence. No dramatic declarations, no social media announcements, just long nights, extra hours, and the decision to stop explaining himself to people who already decided who he was. That's real growth. That's the kind nobody claps for and nobody notices until it's already done. And when the people who once dismissed him start watching from the sidelines, the story doesn't frame it as a victory. It frames it as a realization. He didn't rise to be seen by them. He rose because staying where he was would have destroyed him. The moment that really locks his story in is the reunion. Not because she comes back. People come back all the time when life humbles them, but because of how he responds. There's no anger, no ego, no need to punish her with words. He listens, he understands, and then he walks away anyway. That's not weakness, that's emotional authority. That's a man who finally values his own stability more than validation from someone who once walked away. The real success here isn't the better job or the improved lifestyle. It's the fact that when the past knocks, it no longer has power. He doesn't need revenge. He doesn't need closure from someone else. He already has it. And that's what makes his story stick with you. It doesn't promise that betrayal makes you stronger. It shows that choosing yourself quietly, consistently does. If you've ever been underestimated, replaced, or made to feel like you weren't enough, this story isn't telling you to prove them wrong. It's telling you something far more important. Build a life so grounded that their opinions become irrelevant. That's not just healing. That's freedom. If you made it to the end, thank you for staying with this story. If it resonated with you, even a little, don't forget to like the video. It really, for us, helps more than you think. And if you enjoy deep, real Reddit stories about betrayal, growth, and quiet comebacks, make sure you subscribe to Reddiculous for more content like this. New stories drop regularly, and each one is meant to leave you with something to think about. Drop a comment and let me know what part hit you the hardest. Until next time, remember, sometimes the strongest revenge is peace and self-respect.